It's me, Marilia. I want to welcome you to Salto del Gato. This is my YouTube channel, and this is the gumshoe series of the channel. It's where I use an astrological event chart to find clues in a crime. Now, the crime that I am going to be delving into today, of course, is the Murdaugh trial. And in the first video, I go over the chart. So I'm not going to do this again here. I'm going to be casting some subsequent charts where I try to find the story in the chart or find clues in the chart to enhance the story that we are already discovering or have discovered. So let's go there. I want to tell you that I hope that my voice holds out. I'm having really bad allergies right now, so bear with me. So today we're going to talk about the Boulware family. Who were the Boulware family, and what do they have to do with the Murdaughs? The connection links as far back as Randolph Murdaugh Jr., a.k.a. Buster. He and a colleague, Thomas McCullough Boulware, were contemporaries who both practiced law. From what I can find, this is where their friendship begins, which happens to be during the Prohibition days of the 1940s. Their sons, Barrett Boulware the elder, a shrimper, and Randolph Murdaugh III, a.k.a. Buster, the solicitor, also became friends and business associates. Now, in my opinion, this was an odd coupling until you consider that this is now the 1970s, and their alliance would continue through the early 1990s and include the glory days of the gentlemen smugglers. This group of smugglers were called the gentlemen smugglers because they were college-educated, nonviolent, and they also included women among their numbers. Mostly, these were individuals native to the area. Boulware the elder and Randolph III, Buster, merely followed in their father's way of doing business. Moving into the next generation, Barrett Boulware the younger, a legitimate shrimper, joined his father in the family business, which by then had grown to include a fleet of shrimp boats and other watercraft. Alex Murdaugh and Barrett Boulware the younger continued the generational association established by their fathers and grandfathers. Now we move into the 90s and the 2000s, all the way to the end of Mr. Barrett Boulware's life in 2005 from an aggressive form of cancer. The Boulwares called themselves legitimate shrimpers working out of Allendale, South Carolina. The Grizz, gossip, rumor, innuendo stream, implies they were shrimping for more than shrimp, if you get my drift. Before 4157 Moselle Road in Islandton, South Carolina became the site of one of South Carolina's most notorious double murders and another suspicious death that would open the door to the Murdaugh dynasty saga, it belonged to Barrett T. Boulware the younger. In case you're not familiar with Moselle, it is a hunting property located on the Succohatchee River, about an hour and 15 minutes from the St. Helena's Inlet Islands the Murdaughs co-owned with the Boulwares. Moselle was sold or transferred to Alec Murdaugh by Boulware's wife, Janine. It seems by that time Barrett was dying of cancer and pretty much out of money. According to my research, Boulware didn't have enough money to pay for his wife Janine to stay in a hotel in Tallahassee while he was undergoing his cancer treatments. The property transferred to Alec for $5. I'm not kidding. I've included a copy of the deed in this video. You can see for yourself. But I think there were other reasons for this sale or transfer of property. Let me explain. We have to step back in time a little bit to the early 1980s, so let's go there. During the Reagan War on Crime years, there was a law implemented allowing for the government to seize any assets, houses, land, personal property, cars, boats, money, jewels, guns, anything that was owned by anyone arrested and convicted during a drug raid. I think it was known as the Asset Forfeiture Act, and I believe it's still in play now. Keep that in mind. Now, additionally, Barrett Boulware, the younger, had previously signed an all-encompassing power of attorney known as a POA, not into his wife's name, but into Alec Murdaugh's name. Barrett gave Alec authority over everything that the Boulwares owned. Alec was given authority to sell, trade, mortgage, and do whatever he wanted with everything that belonged to Boulware. The question is, why would he do that? Do you think that Barrett trusted Alec? Oops, bad choice. But, after all, this was a friendship that went back through 3 generations of their families. Or was there more to it? Could there be money owed for some of their nefarious activities that needed to be managed for everybody's safety and well-being, including their children's futures? Or was Barrett trying to avoid those asset forfeiture laws that might apply to him for his past smuggling activities? Recall that he and his wife had been arrested with marijuana and cocaine at the Georgia-South Carolina border. I don't know why Barrett would sign such a document, especially to Alec, but POAs are tricky. One needs to be careful when considering a POA giving someone else full control over everything you own. I can't answer why Barrett did this, but it appears to have been a big mistake. You know, Jeffrey Epstein did something similar to the Victoria's Secret billionaire that he subsequently stole a lot of money from. So it's evidently one of those known legal instruments used by white-collar criminals. Anyway, in Alex's recent murder trial, Boulware's name was brought up by State Prosecutor Creighton Waters as being one of the families that Alex stole money from. Boulware's case is included in the 90-plus additional financial crimes that Alec will be subsequently tried for. I guess Alec put an end to a 3-generation friendship just like that. The Murdaughs have been compared to the protagonists in the Ozark series, where they're involved in a huge money laundering scheme. So, is this what this is all about? I don't know. As I mentioned, the Boulwares kept their activities pretty low-key for several years and publicly claimed to be legitimate shrimpers. No one in that community would dare contradict whatever they said, because Allendale County falls under the 14th District County Solicitor, and yes, Murdaughs held that position until 2005. One of my several resources for information for this video came through all of the work that Will Folks, the establishing editor of Fitz News, has done on the Murdaughs. Another source of rich information is the Murdaugh Murders podcast, created by Mandy Matney and her friend Liz. If you haven't already checked out Fitz News or the Murdaugh Murders podcast, I encourage you to do so. Just Google them. They'll pop up. Now, Mandy, I think, is the one who really bit into the ankle of the Murdaugh saga and persistently refused to let go. So I want to make sure Mandy Matney, Liz, and Will Folks receive credit. A Fitz News article quotes someone as describing Boulware the Younger as rumored to be a smuggler with a flamboyant personality and a wheeler and dealer. Sounds a lot like Alec. And Boulware the Elder is described in the same way. Now, I hope this clarifies how far back shady business deals appear between the seafaring Boulwares and the county solicitor's office that controlled the law in this 14th district of the Low Country. Let's take a closer look into Barrett T. Boulware the Younger. Barrett T. Boulware the Younger was the grandson of Thomas McClue Boulware, who was friends with Alex's grandfather, Randolph Murdaugh Jr., known as Buster. Barrett and his father, Boulware the Elder, were targeted by Project Jackpot in South Carolina and Project Cancer in Miami, Florida. Unrelated but nonetheless interesting, cancer is what killed Barrett Boulware the Younger. It is a fact that by the beginning of the 1990s, the Boulwares and the Murdaughs were established land barons of the Low Country area. During 1983 through 1986, President Reagan launched his war on crime. Do you remember Nancy's famous three-word phrase, "Just say no"? And then 1994, Operation Snowcap focused on eliminating the flow of cocaine. Now, I haven't read anywhere that there is a cocaine connection to the Murdaughs, except that Boulware and his wife Janine were arrested for possession of marijuana and cocaine. So we know at least Barrett the Younger played in the snow. Snow is one of many urban references to cocaine. If I were writing a Southern epic, I would totally use this real-life saga as source material for a narrative. I would freely associate the Boulwares and the Murdaughs with individuals who were in the cocaine business. It's not that far-fetched to make those types of assumptions, in my humble opinion. The 90s saw a lot of government anti-drug activity thanks to President Reagan. It was in this period when Project Dinero launched, also in 1994, and the IRS joined the DEA. They set up a bunch of front businesses and established a bank in Anguilla for money laundering purposes. Hundreds of arrests were made from all over the world when individuals used those front businesses to buy or sell assets such as artwork, jewels, or establish LLCs as offshore fronts to purchase land in order to launder drug money. When the transactions would take place, the government would seize the property, land, cars, weapons, jewels, etc., including the money, and arrest the participants under the asset forfeiture law. Now, I mentioned that because it's interesting that Murdaugh and Boulware created several LLCs in which they purchased that undeveloped, on the surface appearing useless land along St. Helena's. It seems they took a page right out of the government's playbook, or vice versa. By the time Barrett the Younger died, the war on crime had made a huge dent, and a lot of people were arrested. A lot of property, money, and assets were confiscated. A lot of drugs were confiscated. Even today, in 2023, you take one down and some other kingpin pops up to take over. We still have a huge problem with drugs coming into our country, mostly from our southern borders. And today's smugglers, rather than using the low country inlets, they make their way up to places like Montana. The point being that, in my opinion, the war on crime wasn't successful. But that's not the subject of this video. The facts are that no matter how many snares and traps the government created in an attempt to arrest the Boulwares, who by the 80s were certainly on the DEA's radar, yet the government was never able to snag them. They came close, but they couldn't close the deal. Enter in McMaster. Back then, he was the U.S. Attorney and was tasked to play a major role in President Reagan's drug war. At the time, the government was fighting a major battle there in South Carolina, and McMaster was placed in charge of overseeing that battle. So, in my imaginary novel, I would create a character like McMaster, and I would link him to the characters fashioned after the Boulwares and the Murdaughs, and I would explain the fact that the Boulwares were always a step ahead of the DEA by saying McMaster tipped the county solicitor, a.k.a. Handsome, Randolph Murdaugh III, or his father, Randolph Murdaugh Jr., a.k.a. Buster. They, in turn, gave the Boulwares a heads up, like they did during the friendly raids back in the bootlegging days. Therefore, it was a cat-and-mouse chase that took place, and in this case, the lucky swamp mouse, a.k.a. the Boulwares, somehow always got away. I think that narrative works. Now, in that same novel, if I were to write it, I would explain this is how a then U.S. Attorney of South Carolina became Governor McMaster, and I would further elaborate how he benefited from his assistance to the Murdaughs by being the recipient of substantial campaign contributions, as well as winning the Low Country voters through the Murdaughs' influence, assuring him the governorship. In this pseudo-novel that I might write one day, I would certainly include the fact that as land barons, Boulwares and Murdaughs bought up some pretty useless swampland in those inlets near St. Helena's and Hilton Head that remained undeveloped. An inquiring eye could see that that property was ideal for anyone wanting to bring in contraband from the sea through the inlets and offload on this remote and uninhabited island property. I read that the gentlemen smugglers were known to have paid $1 million to each of the two governments, one of Iran and whoever the other country was that they were fighting with, for them to stop the war long enough for the smugglers to offload their contraband. And it worked. This is no shit. It's documented. Google the gentlemen smugglers and you'll find that information. I assume that that actually happened. According to the gentlemen smugglers, it did. I bring that up because I can see what a lucrative business deal it would be for the Boulwares and the Murdaughs to look the other way while these smugglers access their inlet island properties and their other more inland properties for use in their smuggling operations. I am sure those smugglers would have happily and extravagantly compensated those land barons. Can you envision that possibility? The Boulware Murdaugh land barons owned additional clumps of property that were more inland and heavily wooded, but had easy access to main highways, making the property that they owned and invested in jointly a prime location for smugglers to transport their offloaded cargo from the barrier islands onto vehicles waiting in the woods and head out on major highways to designated distribution sites across state lines. Now, here is something to keep in mind. These properties were located only about an hour and 15 minutes away from the Moselle property, which coincidentally happened to have a private airfield, a hangar, and Barrett Boulware kept a pilot's license active up until the time ownership of Moselle transferred to Alec. Let's talk about Project Jackpot. Project Jackpot revealed that the group called Gentlemen Smugglers bought in thousands of pounds of marijuana and hashish into the low country of South Carolina through those inlets. And by the way, they called them Gentlemen Smugglers, but there were several women who piloted some of those boats, and in honor of Women's Day, I think they should be noted as the Ladies and Gentlemen Smugglers. You have to have a sense of humor. I might even, if I were writing that imaginary novel, write myself into it, that novel, and share how I once knew a few of those ladies and gentlemen from back in the glory days, but certainly not through any nefarious acts by me. I hope you keep in mind that this is all a creative, speculative journey I'm on here in this video. Not all of this stuff has been proven. Some has. I'm just theorizing and speculating along with everyone else here, just for kicks. Today, McMasters is now governor of the state of South Carolina. At least 5 people are dead suspiciously. Alec is convicted of 2 of those deaths and has been sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. The Boulwares have died, as has Randolph III, handsome, and there remains this question: what the hell happened to all that money? Oh, what is it that Alex said on the stand? Oh yes, what a tangled web we weave, yada yada. Wait, but there's a little more dirt. Let's talk about a man named Franklin C. Branch. He was captain of one of the Boulware shrimping boats that was busted. Several people were arrested for suspicion of drug smuggling, including both of the Boulwares, father and son. It was suspicious because when the DEA boarded the boat, they didn't find any cargo. The cargo conveniently sunk to the bottom of the Atlantic and was later recovered, thanks to cooperation from one of the 9 arrested. Now, this was back in 1983. So, one day, Mr. Franklin C. Branch, the captain of that boat, was on his way to a local bar in St. Joe Beach, Florida. I don't know if alcohol was involved here, but he walked right into the path of an oncoming vehicle and was killed instantly. He was one of 9 people arrested in that seizure of about 17 tons of marijuana on the Boulware shrimp boat in Beaufort, South Carolina, and he was scheduled to testify as a state witness against the Boulwares when he died. After his death, all charges against both Boulwares were dropped by the U.S. Attorney's Office. The McMaster character, remember him? Now, that was the end of that, and nothing else was done on that case. All charges were dropped. Once again, the Boulwares slipped away from the grasp of the government. But the tangled thread remains entwined between the Boulwares and the Murdaughs that began back when Randolph Murdaugh Jr., a.k.a. Buster, and then Thomas McCall Boulware were friends. Yes, during the 1940s and during Prohibition. There were many transactions and collaborations on land deals between these 2 families through at least 3 generations. Let's talk about these 2 families. Just how close were they? Were they merely business acquaintances? Did they interact on a social, corporate level only? You know, attend each other's company functions and all that? Well, it turns out they were quite tight and shared many social activities at the Moselle properties, and the families even vacationed together. They hung out quite often. What about the wives? Maggie was not oblivious to any of this connection because there is information from their mutual social groups that the Boulwares and Alec Murdaugh and Maggie and their families were really tight friends and did a lot of socializing together. Mr. Boulware the younger was known to openly brag about his involvement in drug smuggling operations. In fact, he was known to have a large photograph framed in his dining room of some Cuban drug lords showing off their huge drug haul, and they would joke and laugh about this openly in front of many guests, including Maggie and Janine. Janine Boulware was known to be quite a shopper at the local high-end boutiques and shops, and it is laughingly said she always paid with hard, cold cash. Maggie, too, was known for liking the finer things. She often purchased designer items and was known to even wear a fur coat to social events in South Carolina. Yet, She had a much muted sense of style, in my opinion. When you look at her home decor, they are not ostentatiously elaborate, and neither was her style of dress. She seemed pretty ordinary. Interestingly, her sister Marin Proctor's home in Charleston, South Carolina, just sold, and there was a picture of it online. I'll try to include it in this video. It is very similar to the style of what Maggie's home at Moselle looks like, except that Marin's house was much more stately and elegant. The house at Moselle looks like a downsized version of Marin's. Now, I'm not saying that Maggie tried to copy her, it just might have turned out that way. But my glimpse into who Maggie appeared to be showed me a sad, insecure, discontented woman who settled for the money and prestige her husband's family history provided her. After her death, people from outside of the Low Country area and from within the area wanted to know about her. What was she like? What kind of person was she? What did the community think of her? Did she have a lot of friends? What exactly was her role in the Murdaugh dynasty? The truth is that there wasn't much shared about her, not even from Alec on the stand, whose description of his murdered wife lacked any real affection. He described her as if observing her from a distance, the way people from the community might. Perhaps Maggie tended to keep to herself. Very few people spoke out about her. Some said that she was a good hostess, that she was sweet and had a good personality, and that she was fun to be around. It said she had a dry sense of humor and was known to drop an F-bomb every now and then. Most said she made sure her children wanted for nothing, that she attended every one of their sport games, and that she was happy to be married to Alec and be a member of such a prestigious family. To be honest, a lot of it sounded very superficial to me, and the only ones that I felt sincerely spoke on her behalf were her sister, Marin Proctor, and actually her housekeeper, Blanca. Maggie seems to be rather invisible and certainly wasn't in a position of exerting any kind of influence. She didn't stand out. It's evident that the ones who ruled the roost in that family were Mr. Randolph, handsome, when he was alive, and Randolph the Fourth, and Alec. Now, there were some not so nice things said about her, and I hesitated to include them, but they are part of the picture. Some of those things were that she was pretentious and was always in competition with her sister, that she was never content with things and always wanted more. Now, this can be psychological signs of someone who isn't happy and is trying to fill a void in their life with things. It's also said that Maggie seemed to give off the sense that she was better than most of the people in Hampton County because she was higher educated than they and married to Alec. And then there was that 911 call where she seems a bit put off to have to deal with Gloria Satterfield's accident. Also, Anthony Cook's mom, who worked or works for SLED, said that it sounded very weird to her when Maggie said, "What if they never find Mallory's body?" Especially since it took 8 days to locate Mallory's body, and even though she was wearing an iPhone watch that could have been pinged that very same day. It was noted that the night of the boat crash, Maggie was present at Luther's bar where her youngest son, Paul, was downing shots of whiskey, being loud and unruly. She wasn't with him, but she was at that location and aware of his presence and did nothing to intervene. After the accident, it seems as if somebody was intentionally delaying efforts to more aggressively locate Mallory. And then, of course, it didn't sit well with anyone that Mallory's parents were not allowed access to go near the search site, but Alec and Maggie were waved right in when he flashed his prosecutor badge. Honestly, it appears there wasn't any great love lost between Maggie and the community. It's also said that Maggie was very insecure about her and Alec, and that she was always very concerned about any new secretaries that were hired and whether they were safe to be around her husband. Now, going back to at least 3 generations to Randolph Jr., a.k.a. Buster, the Murdaugh men were known to be womanizers and unfaithful to their wives. Handsome's wife, Libby, once found an obituary published about her own death, listing her children, her husband, everyone she left behind. It is alleged that she discovered Handsome was cheating on her and threatened to divorce him, and that Handsome had that obituary printed to send her a message that Murdaughs don't get divorced, they die. That was the end of any talk of divorcing. Libby remained married to Handsome until his death, but she had lost her damn mind way before then. It just sounds like there wasn't a lot of self-confidence in Maggie, and she absolutely was overshadowed by this family. Once, Maggie listed her sister as executor of her estate, but Handsome came behind her and scratched through what she had written, which was her sister's name, and wrote himself in. Now, I don't have any idea if Maggie was present when that happened. I didn't see anywhere where she initialed the change. You know, normally when you alter something in a legal document, you have to initial it. I didn't see that. And reviewing Maggie's life, it seems like a very sad life to me. What was Paul all about? According to everything that I've seen in the media, Paul was a troubled young child who grew into an even more troubled young man, whose problems were exacerbated by the permissive environment that his parents provided for him, especially allowing him to drink in their presence. Most people in the community, other than his very close peer groups and family members, describe him as a mean, drunk bully. He seems to have had kind of a dual personality, some say. He was an angry, abusive bully to some, and others say he was a very hard-working young man who would do anything for anyone. Most people you ask will tell you that it was evident that Maggie and Paul had a strained relationship. She had suffered postpartum depression at his birth, and they never bonded. And when his mental and behavior issues began to surface as he grew, she couldn't deal with them. So there was a sort of detachment issue between them that was never healed. In his short life, Paul certainly created his share of problems for himself and others. Ultimately, it was his drunken actions that would bring down the Murdaugh house of cards and opened up Pandora's box of wolves, letting everyone in the world look into the Murdaugh history, going back generationally to Randolph Sr.'s questionable train wreck. For example, some say he loved Gloria Satterfield and would never hurt her. Yet I didn't hear that love come through in the phone call on the 911 tape. And the media notes that the only member of the Murdaugh family to visit Gloria in the hospital was Maggie. Paul didn't visit her. And why did Maggie visit her? Was it out of genuine concern and compassion? Or was it a fact-finding mission? We'll never know. Finally, we get to Buster, the elusive Buster, Alexander Richard Murdaugh Jr., a.k.a. Buster. He is an enigma to me. I so want to give him the benefit of all the doubts because he is, in a sense, a victim of all of this. He pretty much has lost all members of his immediate family. But then you have to stop and think about that. He was kicked out of school for plagiarism. And not grade school, but law school. He was an adult. So there is that. Now let's look at Moselle. Janine and Barrett Boulware's life on this property came to an unfortunate end. Janine and her husband experienced many negative things here. They experienced being arrested and having all kinds of legal problems, and her husband ultimately succumbed to cancer. She was forced to sign over the Moselle property to Alec Murdaugh because they did not have enough money to pay for her to be able to stay in a hotel while her husband was receiving treatment in a Tallahassee hospital. And it's a very similar story to what happened when Alec took it over. with even more tragedy and dire results. Paul, who absolutely adored that property, had his brain blown out of his skull there on the same day. Within minutes, his mother was also slaughtered by the dog kennels. I wonder who owned Moselle before the Boulwares and the Murdaughs. Is it just in a bad location, a magnet for bad energy, for certain birth charts? I'm going to have to do a cartography chart for that location and see what the vibes are there. At any rate, it is now indelibly marked by the Boulwares and the Murdaughs as a doorway to the gates of hell. Or is it people who accumulate karma that magnetize the land? I don't know, but I'd certainly do an exorcism on that property before I stepped foot on it. Just saying. Let's review this saga going all the way back to 1910 and to Mr. Randolph Sr. You do realize that this family not only held the office of prosecutor, but they were also personal injury lawyers. As a county solicitor, well, they prosecuted cases in 5 low country counties, including those undeveloped inlets around St. Helena's and, yes, the upscale areas of Hilton Head. That's right. Everyone was indebted to them for decades. Hell, for almost a century. Talk about power. Oh, that's heavy-duty Murdaugh power. Now consider that could mean that they would be able to influence judges easily who ultimately would rule on the personal injury cases the Murdaugh law firms brought before them. Did anyone say conflict of interest? One can wonder. Now that's just a glimpse at the questionable history of the Murdaugh family that brings us into all of the current blemish breakout Alec brings to the family name, including alleged links and speculative involvement in 5 deaths. 19-year-old Stephen Smith, which I must say, SLED has looked at this repeatedly, and no one can find any connection to Buster. So it's a total rumor and unsubstantiated accusations that are being hurled against Butler, who is probably innocent in all of this, except for the unfortunate legacy he inherited as being a member of the Murdaugh family, making him a prime target for unfounded speculation. I'll just leave it at that. But I don't know. This is just me pulling shit out of the air. The Murdaugh name was mentioned 9 times on the police report and over 40 times in conversations associated with the Stephen Smith tragedy. But some of the interviews that I heard were that it was the Murdaugh boys, not necessarily Buster. So my question is, couldn't this have been Paul and not Buster? Did Paul's struggles include a sexual identity issue? Well, we will never know. But there was something he was trying to anesthetize with all that drinking. And that would bring us to motives. We can all create narratives. We've heard the state's narratives. We've heard the defense's pushback. So if I was going to write a fictional story fashioned after this family debacle, I'd consider this. Maybe Handsome, knowing he was on his deathbed, aware of the tsunami of trouble that was coming to the Murdaugh dynasty, decided to take action and laid down the law to Alec. A meeting was called between Handsome and Alec and other unknown parties, and Alec was told in no uncertain terms, your little troublemaker son has to be taken care of, and if you don't take care of him, I will. Alec realized he had no choice and agreed to let his father handle it. And Handsome reached back into his collection of people who might have owed him a favor or who he had hired in the past to do similar kind of work and worked out the deal. And Alec agreed to step aside. Handsome might have also insisted that Alec make sure that only Maggie and Paul were on site and that he, Alec, got the hell out of there within minutes, and this would explain why Buster wasn't there. Perhaps Granddaddy Handsome used Buster as leverage over Alec. Perhaps he said, I'm either going to take all of you out, or if you cooperate and keep your mouth shut, I'll let Buster live. It wasn't, you see, just about this current generation. For Handsome, it was about saving the name established 100 years ago. Handsome couldn't let all of that be destroyed by one crazy-ass boy. You see, it was about the family name and wealth. Wealth that had been sacrificed for by previous family members who put their own lives on the line to see to it that for generations to come, the Murdaugh name, power, and wealth would survive. Their ancestors worked their entire lives and put all of their effort into building this persona, this dynasty, so that their future generations would follow in their footsteps. And now here at the very end of his life, Handsome was faced with the fact that one batshit crazy boy was positioned to destroy it all. There was no way he could let that happen. 2 days after receiving the news that the deed had been successfully completed, Handsome left this world. Oh, I know, you think that sounds like a far-fetched crock of poop. But it'll surprise you to know that an undisclosed source spoke and said that this conversation actually took place. That Handsome said to Alec, he's your son, take care of him or I will. Wow, nothing would surprise me. But again, we will never know. We will never know the truth. Could Handsome have orchestrated this? Was this his last act to save his family name and fortune? We'll never know now. Because only Paul spoke from the other side through the recorded video on his phone. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'm Marilia. This is Salto del Gato, Gumshoe series. This is a part 4 of my continued work on the Murdaughs undoing. And I hope that you would hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and consider subscribing if you haven't.